with the water shortage, most of it's gone into our building because it's flooded. So once we've turned the taps off, I think you found the water stocks have come back online.
So is it did the whole floor go? What happened?
Oh, I think there's a few floors in the building, in one of the buildings in Queen Street that we're in that got flooded, and obviously with the shutdown and lockdown, people have obviously essential services and checking property services and taps and stuff may have gone amiss.
I got it. Last time we chat, you were in the thick of it. You've been going 20-hour days for weeks on end. It's been another couple of weeks. How's the energy? You look a bit more rested. You look like you've had a few more hours sleep. How's it been going?
Yeah, yeah, no, it's good. Getting through the government stuff and getting back out to our customers and working through the risks that are out there for both customers and the bank itself, and lots of changes pretty much weekly from government. So I think we're on top of that now, and we're starting to get into a bit more operating as normal now that we've moved from level 4 to level 3 and down to level 2. So it's going well.
What's been the biggest thing you've seen change in all the banks in New Zealand in the last 2 months that you've never seen before? What's been something that you've been like, holy shit, like this is what surprised you the most from banks in the last 2 months?
I think there's a couple of things that surprised me. Well, I don't say surprised. The stuff that I knew and things that I felt we needed to accelerate more into, mainly around the use of your data and information and being dynamic. I think people have finally realised what that actually means when you have your information at your fingertips, when your bank can have your transactional data and cloud-based data, and then you can have the information that's actually being changed on a daily basis from a government perspective. When you include that and you start to make business decisions, you can actually do that from anywhere. I think most of the banks have had to go through, shucks, how do we operate everyone working in a work from home environment? And I think everyone's got there. Everyone's sort of taking different times, like my neighbour's, he's a staff member at Westpac, and he was having to go in and sort that out, and BNZ pretty much moved to 4,500 people working from home pretty much straight away, and everyone got there in the end. But without this crisis, you wouldn't think to try those things and actually move that. And I think the surprising thing is that people want to work more flexibly in these environments and in these ways, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that, right? So over 4,000 employees, everyone goes virtual overnight. It's after 2 months, of staff out of the 1,000 are asking or thinking about um, potentially trying to work from home more. Like, what's the feedback been from staff around more virtual work in the future? Remote work?
Yeah, really positive. So not only from staff, but from our customers, and so they're getting used to seeing people, on StreamYard, on Zoom, on Teams, and it's a normal mode of operation today. I think the difference here is not just the connectivity through technology. It's the value and information that you can provide. If you're a banker or you're an advisor and you're upskilled with what's happening in the market, what's happening with GDP, where the hotspots are, in terms of your industry, where the ups and downs and the risks might be, you're going to be much more valuable to your customer. And that's really what customers want all along. So the banking part is only one part, but the value that you can provide in terms of steering them away from risk or growing their business and being there to support them through that in different modes of that, I think that's the realism that banking has come to know that they're more than just the banking transactional debt component.
Do you feel that the optics have shifted on the expectations of what a big business should look like now after all this, with the virtual and kids in the background and dogs and cats and just humanizing shit that potentially wasn't as seen before, or the optics? Do you think the optics have shifted around the level of customer expectation or service now? Do you think it's changed?
I do. I definitely think it has, and I think that's really positive as well, because it enables people to bring their true self into the environment Everyone's got whether it's family, friends, loved ones, partners, dogs, cats. You name it. You've got it. So it's a part of your life, and it doesn't stop you from being any less efficient or effective or productive. It's just managing around your life and what you need to do. And what I like about it is the sense of we're bringing the community back. And if you think about when we're going out of lockdown, the one thing we've gone back to is what it was 30, 40 years ago, sense of community. And so it's buy local, stay local, play local, it's do all those things. And you only have to, well, I don't know about you, but I only walk around the streets and I'm out and I'm seeing neighbours talking together and at the edge of their driveways and kids rolling in the street, bikes and playing ball and that kind of stuff. People being more friendly in their neighbourhood. And I think that's the community aspect coming back to life.
But it almost feels I think it was Roger Dennis, I think was talking about, he said, when the Christchurch earthquake happened, the community of Christchurch had this bond which tightened everything up. And it feels with this at a national level, it's done the same thing nationally for, local, hyper-local, local resiliency, all the rest of it. Do you think this is a blip in the radar, or do you think that this is going to become a new way of how we engage and prioritize things that matter in the world? Because it's very easy after Michael Jackson dies, he's number one again for the next 2 months while it pops again and then it disappears, slowly fades off. Do you think this is a blip in the radar of how we interact with each other, or do you think human connections genuinely changed forever after this moment?
Personally, my personal view is I think we've changed forever. And again, I think that's positive because there's an element of, yes, we've always had technology, and people say, well, technology will take over everything and we digital banks and digital currencies, and we might get a word down that pathway in some way, shape or form, and that's for the ease of convenience. But you know what? There is a personalized moments when it matters connection that people really interact with and engage with. It's when someone's got that snippet of information that can really help you make an informed decision. Should I buy that next house? Should I invest some more money into my business? Shucks, I'm actually struggling here. What form of support do I need? There's a human when it matters component to that, and that's now we've seen that can be done through this interaction, which I think is created a new norm. What that's been created is the fact that we're not structured infrastructure-wise to actually develop this. You have to look at latest spending patterns in both business and consumer, and we are at Christmas level spending patterns.
Yeah, so just go there for a second. So everyone's cooped up at home. It goes 4 to 3. They start getting hyped. It goes 3 to 2, and now dudes just getting active, and everyone's just starting to just get in the mix. Is that good or bad? And did you expect that?
One, yes, I expected it because when you loosen the screws and they come off, people go and do certain things like you go get a haircut, you go to your favourite cafe, you go to all the things that in your community that you go to, and you want that sense of normality to feel, close and connected, and everything's going to be okay. Ultimately, what people want is the feeling of it's going to be okay. And so part of that is normality in terms of what they're doing. I guess, predicting and having a look at it, we did think that we'll get high levels of spend patterns. I think what's happened, though, is where you have infrastructure demand. So things like transport, you have to look at the couriers and see those guys are just getting slammed because of the online shopping, right? And there's only so many of them, and there's only so many hours in a day that they can get. So you're looking at a 2-week wait time on parcels, whereas before you could do that, you could get it done within, sort of 2 or 3 days. And that's the difference, a shift between e-tail and retail. And I think that's a really interesting dynamic. So when we shift into the new norm, which we're doing now, we've got to understand that it's going to take a while for the infrastructure of this to catch up. And not that we should go backwards because the infrastructure is not catching up. Because if you go back into look at the retailers have got to look at footprint. They've got to look at physical spacing. They've got to look at, if your volume used to be at 100%, which was 1,000 people a day, it's now going to be halved because of physical spacing. So that difference isn't going to change that shape away from, the e-tailing and the e-commerce that's happening as well. And so we're just going to play a little bit of catch up on that infrastructure side.
So that's good, right? People are back out and they're getting active, they're getting haircuts, they're not being so smelly, and they're looking a bit better, which is good to be seen in public. Because man, there have been some horrible quarantine haircuts that I've seen on a few of these calls with my buddies. It's a few people going savage, mate. Um,
Yeah.
when you saw this all start to kick back, right? Let's talk about this rebuild phase. But before the rebuild, how much how much did this cost New Zealand in terms of dollars in this last 2 months of being shut? Like how much? What was the cost of this financially that you think this has taken a hit on the country with?
Look, I'm only going to have a stab in the dark. I think. Look, we'll have a reduction in GDP. I think in terms of the gross domestic product, in terms of what's been driving around the country for 8 weeks that we've been through this process and everyone's been sort of shut down. Um, there are some industries that have been impacted, so I would expect GDP to have some sort of negative impact. The bounce back on that as a country, you need to look at the government's giving out the door. We're in the billions of dollars, right? We're well into the billions. We're into the
Yep.
somewhere between 10 and 20 billion odd dollars in terms of that's costing, and that's just from a fiscal country perspective. If you look at the impact on business and revenue, I think you're again looking at loss of revenue for every business around the country, and including the big businesses, right? So you even saw last night Fletcher's having to lay off a whole bunch of staff. You're seeing people with a whole range of staff cuts. So revenue at the top line has been impacted, and I think you're significantly into the billions again there. If you think about the number of SMEs that drive this country, and that's the question I have is how fast does that sort of return? And it does return if people stay local and drive their communities and do that. But we don't have the mix of offshore investment coming in terms of that retail spend. And I think that's where we're really going to notice a difference.
With all of the stuff that's been going on, what's been like the biggest battle off between those in the banking world of the biggest unknown that people are fighting over? Like, what's the one thing that people are um, basically debating to and fro right now when it comes to the New Zealand economy within the banking sector?
I think the banks themselves have been working. All of the banks have been working really closely with the New Zealand Banking Association to try and be available for as many people as they can, both on a consumer front, at a retail perspective, and also on a SME perspective. I think the difficult part has been navigating, working with the government around how to help people access the funding that they need. And you've seen the government come out with the small business IRD scheme, which is really good for those small type businesses. The main problem, which I said last time, which all banks have had to contend with, is the fact that none of the banks are released from any of their prudential lending standards, and that's been a contention. So as you go through this, we are unable to put people in a worse position. That's just a responsible lending perspective that all banks are obliged by. And it's a tough one because we want to do right by the economy. We want to drive the economy, but we also want to make sure that people are sustainable and safe going through this. And I think so. The tension is between people who may not have had good business or management practice before and have an expectation that the government will underwrite to an 80% standard of sort of free cash. And
Got it.
when you look at it, paying back that cash over a 3-year period is going to be quite tough for a lot of businesses, particularly if their revenue doesn't return, if offshore investment and tourist numbers don't return.
And if it's a long tail for the recession to try and build its way, if it is a 3-year thing, that you're then trying to pay back debt over 3 years, which could still be a down cycle anyway in terms of the money that exists for your business, right? So they're probably not thinking that now because they want the cash in there. They're like, 80% free money, but no, I get that. So when it starts out again at zero, right? Like, the entire world for the first time in probably human history went pause commercially and economically. Some parts are obviously still there. Obviously, America's still in lockdown in many places, all the rest of it. How do you see this now with obviously the budget coming out, different pieces that have already sort of dropped? How do you see this rolling out over the next 6 months between now and Christmas? How do you think the economy's, what pieces are going to go next, you think, to try and help restart the engine for the New Zealand economy? How do you see it playing out?
Yeah, look, that's one of the things I'm really passionate about rebooting the economy and making sure we're supporting good level metrics for people to actually grow and drive their business. I think there's a series of things that will happen in terms of the next 6 months between the back end of the year. I think you'll find firstly that a lot of was about before will really drive community, and I think that's great because it brings a sense of pride back. So you'll have people go, if they're going to take leave, they're going to go local and they're going to go national around the country, which is great to support those economies. And you see it on TV now, people pushing that. And as a nation, there's nothing like a crisis to bring us all together and really, really tie us into saying, right, we are a small nation, flightless birds. So let's get around and make sure we protect one another. And I think that's well and truly underway. So that's one. Secondly, I think there'll be a long tail of people that may have taken either extensive funding to keep their business afloat, particularly in that small business and that medium end, to make sure that they can work through that. Now, they're going to need some help to make sure that they don't put other asset classes at risk, i.e. the family home, and some structuring around how we do that. That's where I think the banks in particular have a responsibility for us to work through those structures and make sure that we can support customers to actually structure it appropriately, to not put themselves in positions that are going to make them even worse, but to also help work with the government and provide new standards around what we might need to do. And I think you'll find things like trade credit coming online a lot more. I think people might be prepared to pay a little bit more of a premium to get access to that funding. I think you'll find people might look for factoring solutions or invoice finance solutions and asset finance type stuff as opposed to sort of long-term debt, so that you can manage the needs of the cash flow in and out of your business as it's going forward. I think you'll find a lot of businesses reduce their spend, particularly on fixed and variable costs. If you don't need that subscription, then you probably won't have it. If you don't need that Sky TV playing in your background while you're out serving customers, then don't have it. Those sorts of things will really help businesses survive. And then I think you'll see collaboration in the form of both B2B for business, but more collaboration from my perspective that I'm really passionate about is driving that digital New Zealand, which is highly active, engage with your information on your business on a daily basis, really dynamic through things like our My Business Live platform. Origination, we'll be looking at digital origination, importing information in and out of there, connecting to all the information sources so that we can add a whole lot of value to customers. That's sort of what I see.
Yeah, it's a few bits of there to unwind up. Just quickly on the creative ways to grow. So you basically, businesses now are going to have more creative approaches to how they do business, of what the ways they could structure things. What's the most kind of creative, some of the creative things that you've seen happen for business owners, say in this last month, of how they've restructured or repositioned their business to the market in terms of when it comes to either their banking relationships or actually just thinking about money for survival for their company? Like, what's some of the cool little ninja moves you've seen some people try and pull off during those times?
Yeah, well, look, first, it's about being simple. So, business can be as complex or as simple as you want it to be. And even myself, I've got worked through the process with my companies and working through what we have to do. So, things, the ninja moves that have happened, as I talked about it before, the flip to online and digital origination, so people still doing business online in this channel has really helped. You have to look at the fitness industry, you have to look at the service-based industry, counsellors, and those things are proven methods and methodologies that have worked. But you've also got it in big business too. So you've got management consulting and advisors actually working through this way. We're seeing an uptick in certainly some of the consultancy offshore, where people, we're in a different time zone. So think about that when you're thinking about what you're doing, particularly online. If you're in a different time zone, you have more access to different markets because more people are sleeping. If you're working overnight and you're turning stuff around, people are getting it the very next day. So, there's a lot to be said for that. And that's one of the benefits for New Zealand. The simple stuff around just restructuring your balance sheet and your P&L, just removing the unnecessary costs, particularly variable costs. And I talked about it last time. There's been some really neat moves around, creditors and other suppliers extending longer terms for people. So things with landlords have been and really neat and supporting other businesses on rent and extending that out. But then there's also people actually looking at changing their entire business model, which I think has been really positive. People have just flipped, right? They're saying, well, actually, I can run my entire business on e-commerce and e-tail. I don't need my footprint now. So they're kind of changing that. And that's where I think that the dynamic of infrastructure is going to change as well.
So, I mean, exactly to that point in the States, Twitter's thinking about not ever going back to an HQ head office.
Mm.
Facebook, Snap, and Google have told everyone to stay at home to the end of the year, till 2021. So
Yeah.
they turned up to work in March, and then they're like, later, Bolt, see you in 2021. It's like, it's a lot of commercial real estate. It's a lot of space. It's a lot of offices. And I was talking to a buddy before. It's like, if some of them go, well, then more of the other small businesses have to come. What happens to all those market rents for a lot of these places? Even, talking about hospo and retail, even with physical
Yeah.
spacing, a lot of bars are done on, the ability to have a lot of people in a closed environment. When it comes to, I guess, maybe just hospo for a second, like, how do you think, or have you heard or seen some of these different people in the hospo space look to kind of reimagine what their businesses could look like? Is there any stuff come across your desk that seems like an interesting idea, or stuff that you've kind of looked at that you've kind of thought it's been of value?
Yeah, the hospitality has obviously been really impacted, both in the accommodation space and in the, restaurant bar space. And so it's sort of the cultural hub piece. So if you go back to community, as I talked about before, I think you'll find people will go local. So those people who live in Ponsonby will frequent the local Ponsonby bars and those sorts of things. And likewise in the suburbs and in terms of where you go. And a lot of people like the fact that you can get out. So I think what we've seen though is we've seen the connectivity of people, sharing that human when it matters and that personalization approach. You just look at the proliferation of the app house party. Look at that. And you just only have to see that to know that people are starting to, I saw someone do a cocktail party as a business, do a cocktail party on house party. They sent everybody the cocktails, right? They actually sent them their own pre-made cocktails, and they make them all up, and then they made them together and had a team building session on house party. Now,
That's pretty cool.
that's pretty cool, right? So I think you'll get, bars and hospitality starting to think outside the square. But I do think there's a place for our hospitality community hotspots to make sure that, it's a vibe, it's a centre, that's where people congregate to make sure they can just, relax and chew the fat with their friends outside of their own home environment, particularly if you're working from home,
Yeah.
a lot of the time as well.
But
Yeah.
it's two parts, right? It's quite interesting because if you were in a hospo and you were built on transactions and as many people through the door, if people don't have that sense and pull with you, you're probably stuffed. But if you've got those relationships and depth, and you've got that kind of
Yeah.
pull to the business, people want to back it and go local. And exactly to your point, I was just wondering, well, instead of if you're a bar, say if you've got a depth of a relationship in the hospo space and you've got this sort of community, instead of having the people come to you, what products and services could you actually do to potentially go to them? What would that look like?
Yeah.
Maybe think, I'm just really interested to see, especially with that, you're exactly right, that the need for human interaction and connection, it's just been amplified even more. So he's got us more connected than ever to run these billion-dollar businesses all online, and no one's physically in the offices, but people are missing that human interaction. But when it comes back to that point, what happens there? I've been thinking about this idea of the second drop that's coming, where we're in a bit of a lull, right? We've been on lockdown, been cooped up. We've gone out, we've spent some cash. We've got another bit of runway for this government wage subsidy. But if you're a business and if you've been shut for 2 months, and then even if you open up in a certain type of business, and let's say if you use 50% of your revenue, you may not be there, and you may not be there for the future. What type of, do you think we're going to see another dip in terms of, job losses, businesses shutting down? Maybe they won't be able to get through, they won't have enough cash flow to get through the whole thing. Like, what's this next, how do you see this next wave of business going? Because it's good for some, but obviously for others that maybe had weaker balance sheets, or they've been exposed financially, or just whatever. How do you see that playing out? Because that's going to have another impact on the economy as well, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think the bow wave of riding through the new normal around what we've got as an economy is going to be led by us as New Zealanders because the border is going to remain closed for some time. So if you go back to the
Mm.
markers of the economy and what's driving it, we're not going to have the inbound tourist numbers that we had. Yeah, we might get trans-Tasman travel, but if you look at trans-Tasman travel, most of that is based on people who either A, own business or do business in Australia and vice versa, Australia and New Zealand. So that's just people commuting back and forth. Like that's just like I live in New Zealand, but I work in Australia for the week. So that's a high percentage of that is going to be driving that. I think where I'm focused and where the BNZ's focused is on making sure that customers actually pivot and set themselves up for rebooting into a digitally engaged, and that's mobile led, digitally enabled service or product environment. So what that means is if you haven't already pivoted and got that strategy to be relevant and connected digitally and engaged, then you're going to miss a trick and you will end up riding off the back of that bow wave and getting caught and swamped by that wave because there isn't any way you need a mix of both that physical and digital and that together digital whatever you want to call it with the relationship mix to actually survive through this next period and there's only so much tipping money into a business model that isn't geared towards the future that will be sustainable and as I said earlier what we don't want is we don't want people to go down that pathway and put family homes at risk because a lot of people use business-backed lending off their family homes and those sorts of things. So we really want them to engage with the tools that are actually out there to help them create new markets, help them to identify where should I put my focus if I'm in hospitality. If I've got accommodation services in hospitality, what would I really be looking at here? Because you're not going to be looking at a market that's going to be high in terms of tourism numbers coming through. So we might need to be looking at, okay, as we do infrastructure build and the government goes to shovel-ready crews and they start infrastructure development on housing, because housing is still really critical, it might be temporarily, providing a workforce accommodation and key worker accommodation, really thinking outside the square in terms of what that looks like. Have a look at, Airbnb is just like, sort of died, right? It died pretty quickly. And now bringing that back online will only happen with the New Zealand economy when people go and stay in different places as we travel around. So, I think rebooting the economy has to be focused on one, the new business model of the future for you and your business. So that's your product and your service, digitally enabled, mobile connected, and actually getting your community focused on promoting that for you. So I think those three things are really critical. And then working within the economy that we've got. So the more people that support local and drive local, the better it'll be. Notwithstanding that, we've got the flip side of the other businesses that trade globally that are still doing really, really well. Exports are still doing really, really, really well. People still need our food. People still need our primary industries. So those people are still hiring and they're still driving. I think you'll see automation come in a big way. I think you'll see people really driving automation through their business if they can. So that does mean a change in workforce skill matrix. That's something to watch out for as well.
Yeah, I mean, within the content space, I've always said, like every brand's going to become its own sort of media. I've thought of every business as its own, media engine that tells its stories and does its thing. And talking to the bro Mike from the Instiller, and he talks about, well, he's starting to talk about now, like how every business is its own software company.
Yep.
Everything's its own digital base first, and it builds on top of that, right? And just even that thinking, regardless of what you're in, of how you can utilize technology smarter, that's more efficient, obviously mobile led, engaged,
Yep.
notifications, that whole world. But there is this kind of balance of Barry the plumber from Gore. He doesn't know that world. He doesn't sense with that world. But it's almost in a funky way that the minority of those that weren't in the cloud before in digital are now almost the majority, right? So I think that's kind of flipped because now everything needs to be on. Where's your Google page for this? Do you have a Gmail address, not your actual website? Why does like I think there's a big. I don't know if it's business digital literacy, but there seems like there's a big gap for the masses that we're seen as a minority that are now almost the majority, right?
Yeah. And so it's an interesting point. So if you think about industrialization and you think about the revolutions we've gone through, so right back from where to go, and you get to what happened in the later 1800s and the automation and industrialization that we did there, and you go through to the bricks and mortar. Everyone went to a store and bricks and mortar. Then you go to payments and what we did with payments, and then you connected that to banking, and so we've flipped again from bricks and mortar to being in the ether. What COVID's done is shown us that the fourth revolution around digital, digitization, and I call it mobile first, digitally enabled. That's really where we've moved to really fast. So you can have your own digital platform and your own digital layer, but guess what? You don't have to own it. And collaboration here is the key. So if you want to grow your business, collaborating and having your data sets sitting in other data sets, so you're connected with other areas that you might be Barry the plumber in Gore, but what's stopping you from having your information with all the housing builders, all the builders who build housing, all the council, all the people who are close and around Gore that you might be able to get to on a transport basis, right? Because there's nothing stopping you from then saying, wow, there's heaps more I could do rather than just a one-man band. I might be able to actually take over three of Barry's Plumbers competitors who are all one-man bands, bring them together and collaborate and say, look, guys, we need to come together as one business. It's going to be sustainable. We might even take a share in it each, but we'll service a larger geography. We'll serve more customers, and we'll start growing that through our reach, through our digital network. There's nothing stopping that now. And that's where I think that small business Barry the plumber needs to think differently about how they might approach their market and who they might approach their market with. I was talking to a company the other day, and they're firm into the infrastructure development and contracting around both infrastructure, plumbing, electrical, and a lot of their subbies that they used, they just couldn't afford to stay afloat. So what they did was they brought them all online and said, well, what we'll do is we'll bring you into our fold. And basically, rather than having a run business, they brought all the subbies in and they've put them on wages, and because they've still got the work, and these guys are doing the work and they're still getting paid. And now that's great, but I dare say there's another way you could do that if all those subbies got together and formed their own company and still kept their margin prices up and still were able to do what they were doing before, but utilize the collaboration space with the bigger company who's actually driving and getting the work through RFP.
All I heard was roll-ups. No, but you're exactly right. And so I've been talking with a few different people recently about this next wave of opportunities for roll-ups and consolidation. We had Lisa Tai from Deloitte, one of the associate directors, in your building actually, that was on, and we're talking about, like within a lot of these smaller contractors and stuff, then the Pacifica sort of crew. I was like, well, why isn't there just a cultural roll-up for all these different Pacifica businesses that are doing professional services under one thing, instead of Tom, Dick, and Harry all cruising around and like, oh yeah, that'd be me. And it's like, yeah, but to that point, there are probably 100,000 different business opportunities like that right now in New Zealand, but the people that need to make them are still stuck in operations, not in what that opportunity above is. If you were you don't know much about this roll-ups in this crazy world and what of that, but you want to, where could you go? What could you do? Like, what would a first step be if you were a small New Zealand business that's stuck in a spot like that potentially could look at the consolidation power of others? Like, how would you sort of approach that?
Look, I'd approach it in a couple of ways. I think you've got your local business chambers of commerce and business associations. They're a really good place to start, because if anyone's experiencing any difficulty, that's where they're going to go, and they're going to talk to chambers of commerce and business associations, and they can start the conversations. So that's one. You've got your trade organizations, so you've got your ITOs and those sorts of things that actually people can start to connect to have that conversation. And I would propose that the trade and the organizations, the obligations of those organizations are the ones that should be really starting to think about this. How can they digitally enable some of these smaller players to actually connect together? And it's not that difficult to set up a shared service agency across, for example, plumbers. And if you don't have to look at the ITO for plumbing, and it's already there. What it does need is it needs them to start to think and invest in some infrastructure around digital technology to enable that. There's no reason why we couldn't have a plumber bid library across the country. There's no reason whatsoever. So you could set up every single job from you take housing, put it into a bid library, and then you could have regional bid libraries going along, and those plumbers could start bidding for that work and work through that process. So, and in fact, we've already got some of these platforms that are open and available, and sort of situate ourselves out there. I think the thing for people to be careful about is obviously making sure that they've still got to eat, and they're still going to pay the bills, and they're still going to make their business viable. Sometimes when you go through these, you can get into a bit of a price war, and that's not, pricing is good for the customer. That is relevant, but it's also relevant in terms of the quality and the output that you get too. So you've got to work across those fronts to make sure that you're not eating away at the small business person's margin. So they're getting 2/5 of stuff on, which is also making it hard for them to stay in business.
Get it? Roll-ups.
Roll-ups. You could not necessarily straight roll-ups, but I know that's going to be big on a lot of people's lists. And I can tell you from the banking perspective, a lot of people are asking about, hey, look, are there any industries or people we should be talking to that might want to consolidate? And that's going to happen. That's natural in this market. So that's not unnatural. It'll happen, but there are other ways to actually do that particularly for those small business type people.
Totally get it. As usual, brother, always love a good banter and a yarn. I know you got billions of dollars you got to try and put back into the economy somehow. You'll be figuring it out. No pressure, but I'm sure you'll be fine.
We'll try.
We'll have you on again in another time soon. Appreciate your help, bro, and best of luck. And hopefully your flipping offices come back online soon.
That's the plan. So, come back online soon, 50/50, and we'll get into it. And we're there to support, the SME economy, drive that new digital future and transformation into that. So, if anyone wants to talk or needs anything, please reach out. Don't be shy. I'm available, happy to help. So, thank you again, Robett. It's great to be here.
Bro, easy as. All right, sure, brother. Love your work, and I'll talk to you soon.
Cool.
Thanks, bro. Peace. The bro, Karna Luke, weapon, machine, business dogger, dealing with the billions, roll-ups. I would not have thought that it would be Christmas-like spending right after you go from level 2. But then again, if you've been at home cooped up for a month and a bit, you're flipping just hyped to get out and go, buy some new kicks or go do your bits and pieces. Of course, you're going to do that shit. That's what you do. This next wave is interesting. Collaboration, consolidation of other different businesses, being a bit more creative with your cash flow, pushing stop on anything that's not necessary or requirement for your business. Pretty good stuff. The stuff that we're working on with Brightfire, the crew at BNZ again behind as well with My Business Live, so you can go check that out too, which is pretty sweet. And we'll see you all at the next one, team. Good yarns, good times. See you soon.